Who is the best boss in all of Street Fighter? We're ranking the 6 big baddies from Street Fighter 1, 2, Alpha, 3, 4, and 5 on this week's episode of Talking Block. How's it going, everybody? I want to say I really appreciate the people that have been watching and subscribing and all that kind of stuff. We've been growing this channel slowly but surely. We just recently passed 9,000 subs. Thank you. And to those that engage and repeatedly comment and show us that you're, responding to our stuff, that means a lot to us, more than I can just say right now. It's not going to capture it. And we really appreciate it. So thank you guys. That was just kind of on my heart earlier this morning. And also keep doing it, because those of you that aren't subscribed, you guys are jerks, but you don't have to be jerks. You could be not jerks by subscribing, by hitting the old like button, the Psycho Crush the like button. We're going to get into it here. John, do you have a particular favorite boss character in Street Fighter?
It's funny that I like him a lot, but that would be Bison. I have two favorites, Bison and Gil. Those are my two favorites. Bison shouldn't be one of my favorites, but he actually is, because he's the antithesis of Rose, right? But in a lot of ways, again, he's just such an iconic bad guy. Raul Julia played him in the movie. Yeah, I've always enjoyed Bison.
Bison gets a lot of extra points because of Raul Julia.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone's contesting that either. We'll definitely get into Bison today, because we are talking about ranking the Street Fighter big boss characters. And there can be some confusion here, because who's a boss character? Is it only the characters at the end? Is there a secret boss? Are there sub bosses? Let's organize things right now. I'm going through Street Fighter 1, 2, 3, Alpha, 4, and 5. There's a total of 6 characters on this countdown from worst to best. Some of these characters, as far as the way I'm organizing them here, are definitely cooler than the others that might rank above them. But we're talking about characters as fighting game bosses. What does that mean? You played through the ladder of the arcade mode, and you get to the end, and now you're faced with the ultimate test, where you have to learn and to put everything that you've learned together to defeat, and they're usually way harder. They have special abilities that you normally wouldn't be able to access. When you complete the arcade ladder and you defeat these characters, you have that sense of yes, I've accomplished something significant. I've done it. I've leveled up. And they should also have a particular impact on the game's story. They should have an intimidating presence. Be a boss. Be significant in that way. So, but what does it mean to you, John? I want to ask.
Apparently, you don't be in Street Fighter 5 because that game doesn't have any single-player modes or any kind of boss characters.
Well, it does now, and it does technically. We'll get into that for sure, but you're not wrong. I know what you're getting at.
So pretty much be not Street Fighter 5. Be all the other Street Fighter games that actually have proper bosses and other stuff like that. That's what it means to me.
It takes me back to when I was a kid playing through, and you get stuck on certain opponents, right? Yes. Especially with the AI, because they're rereading your inputs and whatnot, and to an extent, the game kind of chooses when it lets you go forward when you're at a certain skill level. And I remember spending a lot of time, trying to finally beat Balrog to get to Vega. It's oh my gosh, and another half an hour before I beat Vega, and you get all the way up to M. Bison, and that was a very particular feel, and I think there's a significance to being a boss in a fighting game, right? We still celebrate it. We got Omega Rugal and things like that recently in KOF 15. That was a pretty big deal. So anyways, we will jump into it here. Guys, I want to know from you, though, how would you order the 6 bosses of the Street Fighter games thus far? We're not talking about sub-bosses. So let us know in the comments, and then let us know at the end if you've agreed with our list here. But number 6 overall is, yes, the Street Fighter 5 boss. It is G. Now, this is a very different situation than virtually everybody else on the list, and that's why G is in last place here. He is a cool character, and I've had my gripes with G. I did not like the way he was designed initially in terms of how he was executed, but I think his overall design with gameplay and visuals and story are all really good when they're implemented properly, which they more or less are now. He's a very entertaining character to watch. He's explosive. He does flaming flip kicks and stuff. His story has us all on the edges of our seats. He's very closely, somehow, mysteriously tied into what's going on with Gil and this end of the world. He's got a tie back to Q, which is one of the most mysterious characters in Street Fighter, who people are really interested in finding more out about. Here we are like some 20 years later, and maybe G is another portal into what's going on with Q. That's exciting. But like you were saying earlier, he's not really a boss when it comes to, the traditional arcade mode ladder and then this, big formidable, extra formidable foe at the very end of it. He's a DLC character that didn't make it into the game until 3 years after release. He's really only the game's boss in title alone, and that's because Capcom put on some website somewhere, oh, by the way, G is the boss. And it feels like that was sort of an audible they called when like Necalli wasn't working out, and it's like Bison serves as the boss for the story mostly and such, but technically G is the boss of SF5. He's a great character, not a great boss. But what do you think about G?
I think G's really going to have a big presence in Street Fighter 6. I think he's going to be the main boss in that game, and that's going to be the real chance for Capcom to, they kind of mulliganed, I think, here with Street Fighter 5 and just, kind of picked up their ball and went home and said, give us Street Fighter 6 and we'll make the story work, kind of thing. That's kind of how I look at it. So I do think that G is really cool in concept. He's actually one of my favorite DLC characters they've ever added. I really like him a lot. I love the voice actor, what they did at Evo with the voice actor, that performance. He looks awesome, as you said. Like, this is great, but we need another game to really realize what he's going to be.
Yeah, and I do hope, I'll say this here, I do hope that G is the boss of Street Fighter 6, or at least maybe a sub-boss who contributes his power to something like that. But I want G in the upper echelon of the importance of the story and of like the, as far as I can tell right now, the opposition to the good guys. I think they call that the bad guys. All right, so moving on to number 5, we have the boss of Street Fighter 1. Sagat. Now, I initially had Sagat higher up on this list because of who he is as a character. But when I'm thinking about him in terms of being a boss, he broke ground first. And I don't know that he was necessarily the first fighting game boss ever, but for a lot of intents and purposes, Sagat was the first to do it. He was at the end of the arcade ladder. He was significantly more difficult. Now, this is at a time where the game was significantly more simple, a lot more janky. It was the prototype of what we're getting, later on. But he does check all the boss boxes. But the reason why he's ranking so low on this list is because Sagat has very much moved out of bossdom as a character. He was demoted to sub-boss in Street Fighter 2, and he hasn't been a boss almost at all since then. He's a cool character. Capcom said, nah, this character doesn't want to be that. He wants to go in another direction. Fine, fair enough. And I'm excited to see where he goes. But he's not going for upper management, I can tell you that.
He's had his time at the top, and he's kind of a reformed bad guy now, and that's actually a real cool story arc for him. It's a noble pursuit in some ways. He's still kind of out for himself and struggling with that and all that. So that's cool. And he was also a boss character in the alpha games. He was one of the main ones you would fight at the very end. And so they set him up pretty darn well. But again, you want to evolve character story. You don't want him doing the same thing for the last 30 years, or what are you doing? So that's a good spot for Sagat.
Number 4 overall. Now, John, I'm going to turn it over to you. Who do you think should go here? I went with Street Fighter 4 for slot number 4. It's Seth.
Okay, Seth.
Seth is not bad.
Seth, I actually really liked as a boss character, and I still even like them in Street Fighter 5. I think they're fairly well done, except for the big problem with them is they're a little bit too much of a Bison clone. They're ultimately another body for Bison, right? And they should have made them a little bit more of their own thing instead of tying this stuff so heavily to Bison, because it would allow them to go off in different directions. But overall, I think that Seth is a fairly well executed character, and they're frustrating and annoying, and they steal things from you that you kind of want. They fit the frustration and challenging factor of what a boss character should be.
Sounds like my ex-wife. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have one of those. The cool boss thing about him is that he's like an amalgamation of a lot of the other characters. You can see in real time him directly stealing Dalsim's moves, Zangief's FSPD, Guile's fireballs, and that's not new by any stretch of the imagination. Shang Tsung was turning into the cast back in MK1, but that is a cool and I think very valid boss sort of thing to do. Boss tactic, you might say. He was also very, very difficult. I remember playing him originally in Street Fighter 4, trying to finish off the arcade mode, and he's like sitting there reading your inputs, and like anytime you jump, that's when he DPs, and only then, well, unless you're trying to do a move and he invincible DPs through your combo or something like that too. But very much a traditional boss sort of feel for a fighting game, and it did feel satisfying defeating him. But you're right. It's like something about the fact that he was just a bison clone body, and he's very bland, right? Because he's not supposed to have much of an identity. He's the amalgamation of a lot of others. But that identity, it's sort of there. It's very basic. It just checks the box and then it's done. It doesn't go above and beyond. And then in Street Fighter V, he certainly was not the boss there. I mean, he was defeated by Jury. He kind of became like Jury. So he's sort of that character that lowered in status and now is maybe similar to Sagat, we'll see, is going off in other directions. But that direction isn't boss-like. Yeah, I have a note here. It felt like he was... Like, his story was bad guy wants power. And it's like, yeah, well, so that's what it's supposed to be. But that's not taking me anywhere new. That's not inspiring me with something fresh. It's just like, kind of towing the line. So, fair enough. Gets you kind of smack dab right in the middle here. So now, number 3 overall is also Street Fighter 3. We're sticking with the numbers matching up with the ranks. It's Gil. Gil is a boss, man. And this is your favorite, you said? Or one of your second favorite. Tell me about Gil. What do you think about Gil as a boss character?
Gil is great because he's got the angel devil thing going on, and his motives are basically to start a brand new kind of utopia, a brand new peaceful Earth, with the most powerful warriors out there.
As an Illuminati leader, if that doesn't, that's high status. I am able to control people. I have enough charisma to get followers. Like, that's some backstory or some personality development right off the bat that puts him up there in that kind of echelon.
Yeah, and then the new voice actor for Gil is Liam O'Brien, who is a phenomenal voice actor. Just does a great job with his presence. His lines are very quotable in Street Fighter V. He looks brilliant. He's such a great boss character, and you feel the power with him. Like, you feel how dominant and other stuff he is. And of course, has one of the best moves, in my opinion, in Street Fighter history, and that's the resurrection.
And the first time that happens to you, when you're like, I've finally, because Gil very much sets you up for that, like, oh my gosh, I've gotten here, but now I got hit by my first super and I realized just how broken this character is and how hard this is gonna be. You finally KO him and you're like, yes. And then he sits up, he does the Undertaker move. Are you kidding me? And then you're like, all that was for naught, and I'm way in far. He makes you feel small, and that is something that I think a boss character should do. Gil does it very well. He also comes across as the Messiah. He's they went with this kind of like Greco-Roman sort of Jesus-like style, and that immediately puts him up there also with like, oh, okay, so this is sort of the theme, the crowd he's running with. That goes beyond president of the Illuminati, and he becomes a god figure. And all that implies. This character is able, and not like the character Abel. I mean, this character has ability, right? He can get stuff done. Basically, a Greek statue. Yeah. Dude, I think Capcom did a really good job, and they brought him back in SF5. He's not the boss of the game. In fact, he hasn't even been that good up until maybe now. Yeah. But he still retains that sort of air about him, and he's only existed before this point as a broken boss character, which got him banned. You can check out another video of ours if you want to hear more about that. But he got him banned because he was so overpowered. So when they designed him to actually be like a playable roster member in SF5, they really had to tone him down. And I think they were just trying to err on the side of making him not a boss. So it's like, this is the watered down version of Gil that can be on a character select screen. But I dare say he's the sort of character that's not really meant for that. He's more of a boss character than he is a character select character, if you will, if that makes sense in a certain point of view.
Gil is one of my absolute favorites. Did such a knockout job with them.
Next up, I've gone back and forth on these two a handful of times, and I think we all kind of know who the last two characters are. But number 2 is Akuma. Mm-hmm. Did you think it was going to be Akuma, or did you think it was going to be someone else?
I wondered if it was going to be someone else, but yeah.
Yeah, so it originally was, but I've gone back and forth on this, and I'll tell you why the other person is in number 1, the other character I should say. But Akuma is, He's not at the end of many ladders like per se, but he is the secret boss at the end of Street Fighter 2. And for him to come in and do what he does to Bison, that certainly raised the stakes and made you feel, especially if you spent, half an hour beating Sagata, then half an hour beating Vega, and then another 45 minutes trying to beat Bison, and you're like, oh, this character just takes care of the main boss like that. This is a big deal. And indeed he was. He was just a ridiculous character that had ridiculous abilities. Just everything was turned up to 11 and a half. He really occupied that space of scary, you're in over your head. How are you ever going to be able to face this dragon? And he's been so popular. If this were about who are the most successful characters, just all in all, I think I would put Akuma at number 1. But this is about bosses, and so he's way up there. And he's also been boss in like crossover games. I think it was Marvel. He was the only crossover character in the first of the Marvel vs. Capcoms, right? Which would maybe be Children of the Atom. He was also in Puzzle Fighter. Like, he's the secret final boss in Puzzle Fighter. He's just always had this, like, I'm better than the rest of the cast in a matter-of-fact way, not only in name and in implication in story, like in canonical ability, but almost always in actual ability in game.
When Akuma pops up, you really feel his presence there, and it's like, oh crap, I've got to face Akuma now. And he typically is one of the toughest bosses in the entire game, if not the toughest, because he's oftentimes a hidden boss. You don't find him unless you meet certain parameters to unlock him or do whatever. And it's like, if you do that, you feel that immediately, and you're like, oh crap, like I unlocked him. Do I really want to do this anymore? And usually Capcom gives them like extra souped up powers, like the double air fireball, then just gives him ridiculous things. And the moment he pops up, you feel it. You feel it immediately. He has such a presence about him, such an evil devil, demonic presence. That is what Akuma is.
Yeah, and as a character, he's only maybe slightly less popular than the likes of like Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, and maybe not even Ken. But they use him all over the place, and he's welcomed all over the place. And hey, he's even got some appearances that others don't. Like, he's the only one to jump into Tekken 7, for instance. And Akuma's way up there, and it was hard to beat him out. But ultimately, one character did in terms of bosses, and that is, of course, M. Bison. Now, the best version of M. Bison is definitely Raul Julia, but, it's all of them, because M. Bison has retained boss status even when he's not. It's almost like if you look up fighting game boss, which character's portrait is most likely to be in that dictionary? It's M. Bison. Shang Tsung might be around, and Shang Tsung's right up there with M. Bison. Everybody else was sort of, maybe not Sagat, but like sort of modeled after Bison's example in certain respects. Like, everything goes back to, like, let's think about the initial Bison checklist of like what Capcom did in Street Fighter 2, and then we can kind of make some tweaks or evolve it from there. But it sort of starts with M. Bison, and like, he is the villain of Street Fighter. He is the boss of Street Fighter, and that, of course, has changed as the story progresses, and he dies 1,000 times and comes back, and maybe he's completely gone, and they brought someone in new and whatnot. But when you think about Street Fighter broadly, when you go back through your memory banks of, your experiences with the game, M. Bison is the boss. He has just so matter-of-factly become that I think that's what puts him at number 1 on this list. And it's like, I had him at number 2, and that just felt so wrong. I was like, I got to listen to my gut here, and I got to appreciate what this character is, even just beyond the technicalities of like, well, he's boss in this game, but not this game, and he got beat by Akuma, so isn't Akuma a bigger boss? Like, well, sure, whatever, but man, when it comes down to it, M. Bison's your guy.